There we go. That's a little better. All right. So, we've been fooling around with a bunch of different virtualization platforms for hosting my DayZ server, with mixed results. First thing I want to talk about, awesome project. Proxmox, this was my, sort of my first choice, I suppose. This is what I wanted to switch to. I've been using ESXi for a really long time from VMware. So first of all, what is virtualization? Virtualization is the act of basically splitting your main system, whatever system you want to use for doing multiple install-worthy applications. Virtualization is a way of achieving that. So it takes one system, essentially, and splits up the resources within that system to make smaller, sort of containerized computers. So in achieving that goal, you have two options for virtualization. Here, let me get a little diagram. So, option one would be, we'll call this one the main node, right? So this is your desktop. Let me just get my settings here. I'll call this your main desktop. All right, so hopefully this is legible. Yeah, let's up that just in case. Can I still? Yeah, cool. 24? Oh, more than that. We can go higher. 36. Sure. Okay, that's your main desktop, right? So usually, the way it would work is you would install. So your blue is going to be your Windows install. So yeah, normally it's going to go something like this, right? You have your desktop, you do your Windows install, right? That's fine. That works, no problem. Next thing you could do, oops, sorry, still selected on the line here. Next thing you could do from there is install a piece of software to handle your virtualization. And this is what's known as a type 2 hypervisor. So this would be something like VirtualBox, which is an Oracle product. Or it could be like, I heard of another one that a lot of people tend to use. Anyway, just look up what that's a type 2 hypervisor, something like a piece of software that you run on top of an operating system like Windows. That's option one. All right, option two is we make this again here. This is the main desktop. All right, option two is we cut out the middleman and we go from desktop to a type 1 hypervisor. So this is a type 1 hypervisor. This would be something like VMware, ESXi, or Proxmox, which is based on the Linux, KVM slash OVEM. What is it? I can't remember. OVMF. solution. So there's a type 1 hypervisor essentially replaces your operating system and acts as like a very thin operating system exclusively for virtualizing computers. Yes. So that's generally how the hierarchy goes. Now, obviously, you have more overhead to work with when you rely on a type 1 hypervisor, because you're not consuming resources running another operating system in between your main bare metal and your hypervisor. Now, that being said, okay, your virtualization is only going to be as good as your hypervisor, right? If you have a shitty type 1 hypervisor or a shitty type 2 hypervisor, it doesn't really fucking matter how many layers you have in between. It's still shit. So, back to, now that we have a basic understanding of what a type 1 and a type 2 hypervisor is, right? They're all basically going to let you make little containerized computers out of the resources of your main computer. Proxmox. That was the first choice. Proxmox has come a long way. The Linux kernel in KVM has come a long way. It is arguably the best way to virtualize machines. Arguably. I would say for 90% of people and 90% of applications, Proxmox is the shit. First of all, both VMware ESXi and Proxmox are available for free with limitations. Proxmox's limitations are far less reaching than ESXi's limitations. Proxmox pretty much works the exact same between the enterprise version and the free version. The only thing that you give up by not buying a license for Proxmox is support and access to the enterprise update repository. So there's still a free update repository that you can use. It's just not as, it's community maintained and community tested, I believe. It might not be community maintained. It might even still be maintained by the Proxmox dev team. I'm not sure. But I know that it's obviously not certified for enterprise use. So if you're going to deploy the server in your office and something goes wrong, they're not liable, right? That's pretty much the only difference between the enterprise and the consumer level of Proxmox VE. And the interface is fantastic. This is an example of what it looks like. You know, pretty much every statistics you could possibly want about your system is here. It's fairly simple to navigate and understand once you know what you're doing. And it just... it looks complete, and it's a Linux backend, which means that it's pretty easy to go into the shell and modify something if you want to, as long as you understand a little bit of Linux fundamentals. Yeah, and it's extremely well documented. The form is fantastic. I really, really, really like Proxmox, and I wish I could have used it. As you can see, my server is running ESXi right now. This is what I started with. I wanted to I wanted to switch from it and go over to Proxmox, but my particular application just didn't run well in a Windows container. So, to sum it up, Proxmox is probably going to be more than good enough for 90% of people. And this isn't to say that the Windows virtualization in Proxmox is bad. It's probably perfectly serviceable for most people. I just run a really specific application that didn't like it. And I think it came down to either memory access latency or hard drive access latency. But I'm running a DayZ server, which essentially relies a lot on MySQL calls, I believe. I believe the Hive is still based on SQLite now, I think. It might be its own database, but either way, it's running on a database hierarchy, which means that everything that the server calls for, whether that be loot or spawning anything really, is going to, any sort of persistent value is going to come from the database, which means it's doing a lot of database interactions with the system. So I guess that means the I/O speed is extremely important, right? It needs to, well, not so much the speed, but the latency, right? So if the database needs something, it needs it fucking now. It can't wait. The more it waits, the more that translates into stutters into the server. So I think pretty much every DayZ server stutters a little bit until there's a lot of people in it, because the way the server, from what I understand, the way the server works is basically when you're not in an area, it's not going to render or calculate loot in that area. And the first time someone walks into that area, it's going to start trying to play catch up and do a whole bunch of calls at once. And that just naturally translates to a bit of stuttering. So as long as the server has enough people in it that it's sort of managing or rather loading most of the areas of the server because the people are spread out, I think that's where you get the best experience because it's already done all that work in most places. But I noticed that when I play by myself on the server, unless it's been running for a while and I've been running around a lot, it stutters. Hopefully I can demonstrate that. But anyway, to put a bow on all of this, with Proxmox, that stuttering was just so much worse. And I tried every sort of, and this could be, so the thing is that it could also be related to my hardware. I'm running a first generation Threadripper based system, and first generation Threadripper especially is a little bit finicky with KVM. It took me a while to figure out how to get it to properly virtualize with a, basically you want as much bare metal kind of peeking through to the virtual machine as possible. Oops, sorry. I'm looking for task manager. So in my ESXi virtual machine here, if I go over to the performance tab, right, the virtual machine knows what processor's in here. It sees that it's an AMD Ryzen Threadripper 1900X 8-core, right? It knows what it is. That's good. It's basically telling the machine, hey, here's exactly what processor is in here, so you know exactly how you should be treating it, right? That's only partially true. The virtual machine still needs... So if I had a higher-end Threadripper in here that had multiple dies on it, I believe the 1900X might be the only one that doesn't have 2 dies. It might still, but don't quote me. I'm not sure. It might only be a single die. It might be dual die. I'm not sure. I think it is dual die, but I think only 1 die. I think 1 die on the 1900X is exclusively for like cache and memory and stuff like that. Or don't quote me. I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure that all the processing cores on the 1900X are on a single die, which means NUMA, or telling the system how your processor cores and memory are split up between multiple processors, or dies in the case of Threadripper, doesn't come into play with the 1900X. I'm pretty sure that's true. However, on Proxmox, you usually have to manually specify which cores and what in memory channels are tied together so that it can properly dish out that hardware to the virtual machines without having, say, a core be on processor 2 and the memory channel that the virtual machine is using on processor 1, because then there's going to be latency because it's going to have to communicate across an interconnect to basically transfer data between that memory channel and that processing core. This is a lot to go through. I know this is really heavy. I'm sorry. But that's just hurdle number 1 with Threadripper and virtualization. From there, specifically with KVM and Proxmox, whenever I tried to basically pass through the host CPU, basically say, hey, it's not an EPYC, hey, it's not just a generic KVM processor, it's an AMD Ryzen Threadripper 1900X. Like, can you boot with this? It would just blue screen. Whenever you try to boot with it, it would just immediately system thread not handled, blue screen. And believe it or not, it was really hard to find a reliable answer for how to fix that. I did eventually fix it. It involves putting basically a certain ignore field into the bootloader of Proxmox. Some people say this comes with a performance hit. Other people say it doesn't. I'm not really sure which is true. But either way, it wasn't performing well enough after all my modifications and testing to justify the switch, even though I liked the interface the backups, the better file system support. It really is hugely superior in every other aspect over ESXi. It's just I really need good memory and disk latency. Really need that. Otherwise, this application just doesn't. It's not serviceable. Not able to be deployed. So that was a lot of long-winded techno-babble. All I have left to say is that ESXi, I guess I can explain how it works now that we've gotten over why I'm not using what I actually prefer to use. ESXi is pretty good. It has better, I would say it has better virtualization of hardware support, if that makes sense. Like, it is better at virtualizing what it can virtualize. I think that's universally true, whether it be Windows or Linux. I'm pretty sure that the acceleration, that's the word I was looking for. It's better at acceleration. I'm pretty sure that's universally true. Again, depending on your particular application, you might be able to find an edge case or multiple, or it might be true that for a majority of applications, KVM is just as fast or maybe even a little faster because it's lighter. I don't know. All I'm saying is that for this particular application, the acceleration is better. The interface isn't terrible, but there's a lot of kind of important things that are sort of hidden away. So here's the configuration of my current virtual machine, right? 16 gigs of RAM, 5 CPUs, my controllers, my network adapters, right? All that's here. But like there's certain settings in here that you probably want to change that are hidden in the VM options tab. None of this, right? VMware tools, maybe you want to check and upgrade tools before each power on. Yeah, that's not super important, right? Synchronized guest time with host, that's probably a good one to have on. Not super important though, right? If we go down under advanced, latency sensitivity. Look at this one. This one's kind of important, specifically for fucking me. Telling the machine that you want it to be very sensitive to latency, especially if you're running multiple virtual machines, that's pretty fucking important. You really need that. And it's hidden all the way in this back menu. Like, what the fuck? There are a few interface things. There's a lot of settings that are just not available. And in general, it feels very 2008-ish. Yeah, it's not as good. The networking options aren't as good. Again, basically, when you're running Proxmox, you're basically running Linux. So, I mean, we're basically comparing Linux to a closed source operating system here, so should I say any more? It has a majority of the major features, and the differences between the enterprise version, or Proxmox, because Proxmox is basically unlocked on the free version, and this, the limitations you should know of. I think you're limited to 8 virtual cores per virtual machine. I think there's also, you're limited to 1 CPU socket. You can only have 1 CPU socket in the machine you're using to virtualize. And, or it might be a total core limit. How about we look it up? So I know exactly what I'm talking about. Let's see. Free restrictions and limitations. Here we go. Oh, this is from Nakavo. I'm not sure how reliable this is. Oh god. Oh god. I was hoping for a bullet list. Okay, this is what I was looking for. No official VMware support. Same with Proxmox, right? Max 8 virtual CPUs each VM. That I got right. Cannot be managed by vCenter. So vCenter is the Windows application. Go away. Is the Windows application version of this, and it actually has a lot more settings than this interface does. This is the web interface. So basically, if I type in the IP address of my Type 1 hypervisor, whether it be Proxmox or ESXi, once it's connected to my network, after initial setup, through the management interface port right? So you basically, when you do initial setup, it's going to ask you what network card in your computer you're going to want to assign as a management interface. The IP address of that interface, right, or Ethernet card, is going to be the one you connect to, and then you're going to get this web interface here. This is essentially a website you log into, but it's locally hosted on your local network. Following me? When you do that, this is basically what vCenter replaces in the data center. This web interface is, they don't care too much about it, it seems. They haven't updated it in years, and the updates they have done have pretty much unanimously been shit. vCenter, however, I haven't been able to use since ESXi 5.5, because I think you still could use vCenter in 5.5, and at some point, I think after 5.5, they cut off support for the free version. So now you can't use vCenter unless you have the enterprise version. vStorage API is not available. I'm pretty sure this is their special sauce version of basically hooking up a SAN or like a high capacity disk array. Or maybe it's the automated protocol for communicating between your virtualization machine and a SAN. I'm not familiar. This is too enterprisey for me. I've never used vStorage in my life. I don't have a SAN. Don't know, but you can't do that sort of stuff with this. And I'm sure with Proxmox you could. Unlimited. So this makes me think that there is a limitation. There might also be a memory limitation that isn't mentioned here, like total system memory, I think. But I could be wrong. Yeah, and not to mention, so this is another thing with ESXi. As ESXi has continued to update, I'm pretty sure ESXi used to be free BSD based. And now, I could be wrong, it might be some other form of a Linux, they might have taken code from the Linux kernel, I'm not sure. But I'm pretty sure over time, they have had to cut out more and more of whatever they based the initial earlier versions on, which, like I said, I want to say is free BSD. I could be wrong. It might have always been 100% their code, but I think I remember something like that, and I don't know if it's because of that or just because of them, they're trying to cut down on bloat, but over time they have cut out more and more natively supported hardware, and have, yeah, so now this is really old shit. This is Westmere EP CPUs, if you're still trying to, yeah. And Sandy Bridge, though. So a big way that a lot of people tend to virtualize is homelab stuff, like what I do. And when you're running a homelab, you tend to use older hardware because you're using your last generation desktop or whatever to experiment and play around. ESXi is 100% going to have worse hardware support than Proxmox does. So if you have an Otter system, broadly speaking, it's going to have worse hardware support. They're cutting out more and more when it comes to network card compatibility. They're cutting out more and more when it comes to strange desktop platforms, right? Basically non-enterprise hardware. And as of now, it looks like Sandy Bridge is out. Because we're running, I think, a version of 7, whether that be 7.1, 7.2, I don't remember, but we're definitely running ESXi 7 point something. And it looks like at this point, Sandy Bridge, it might let you install, but it's not supported in future releases. So, yeah, here we go. Driver, it's very popular. I think they even emulate this particular NIC, the E1000. Apparently, cannot be found on Intel NUC computers. This is what I'm saying. So the thing you have to understand is that every Type 1 hypervisor is going to have hardware oddities. Some of them will be circumventable, some of them will not be, regardless of what you decide to use, whether it be ESXi, Proxmox, or something else like Zen-based option. whatever you might want to use. There will always be oddities regarding particular hardware. Like my situation with Proxmox, right? But ESXi is really starting to go down the tubes in that regard. Really, really bad. Anywho, that's pretty much all I wanted to say as far as the virtualization side of things go. Just gonna turn this down a bit. So, with all that said, I think it's a good time for us to actually play the server for a bit. Make sure everything's running the way I want it to. And yeah, we'll go from there. Thank you for listening to, if you're watching this on YouTube, probably just going to end it here, because that's all I really wanted to say for the YouTube peeps. If you want to catch the gaming side of this, check out my stream on Twitch. We're looking at twitch.tv/SpottedTango if you're looking to check out the gameplay side of this video. But yeah, otherwise, thank you for watching. If this was the part you came for, which I'm pretty sure there'll be no one on Twitch. But yeah, thank you very much, and have yourself a good day.